Hello to everyone. Welcome to this evening's virtual event with Brookline Booksmith, featuring Amanda Kabak for her new novel, Upended, in conversation with Tim Hillegonds. Live captions have been enabled for this event, and if you would like to view the captions, you can find the live transcript button at the bottom of your Zoom window, or if your screen is not maximized, hit the ... more option at the bottom of your screen to find it in the menu. These transcriptions are automatically generated. And I will drop this in the chat for everyone to read. Welcome, everyone. My name is Bonnie, and I'm a bookseller at Brookline Booksmith in Brookline, Massachusetts. If you're familiar with our store, welcome back. And if this is the first time you're hearing about us, welcome. It's great to meet you, and we're happy to have all of you join our community this evening. We appreciate your support of Amanda and an independent bookstore through your purchases and attendance. Just as a reminder, we love to be able to make as many of our events free and accessible as possible, and you make that possible through your purchases. As a bonus, Amanda will be signing and personalizing copies of the book purchased through our Eventbrite page, and you can return to that page at any time between now and 9 a.m. Eastern Time tomorrow to grab a signed book, and I will drop that link in the chat for everyone as well. The chat and question box are open, so feel free to make use of those. Remember to set your chat to all panelists and attendees if you'd like to chat with others in the audience. Please drop your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom window so they're not lost in the chat. Please note that Brookline Booksmith has a very strict policy against abusive behavior and language, and at our discretion, any attendee can be removed from an event for such behavior. And now for the good stuff. I'd like to start by thanking Tim Hillegonds for being here as a moderator tonight. Tim is a Pushcart Prize nominee, and his work has been featured in The Guardian, the Los Angeles Review of Books, The Rumpus, and Hippocampus magazine, among others. He currently works as a contributing editor to Flaglass City, a digital journal of the urban essay arts. Thank you, Tim, for being here. And it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's author, Amanda Kabak. Amanda is the author of The Mathematics of Change and Upended, published through Brain Mill Press. She has been awarded the Lascaux Review Fiction Award, the Arcturus Review Al-Samak Award for Fiction, the Betty Gabehart Prize from the Kentucky Women's Writers Conference, and has received multiple Pushcart Prize nominations. She has published stories in the Massachusetts Review, Tahoma Literary Review, Sequestrum, and others, and is a former Boston native. She lives in Florida now, but for tonight, we can call her a local. If that's all right with you, Amanda.
Please do.
All right, and now to introduce the book. Upended is the anticipated second novel from an author who Tayari Jones called a writer to watch. It tells the story of Maddie, a person whose life is humming along nicely, or so she thinks, until her life is turned upside down when she survives a vicious attack from an unknown predator. The moment she opens her eyes in the hospital, it's as if her life starts up all over again on a brand new day one. Except this new timeline reveals that nothing in her old life is what it seems. This time-bending novel is an exciting new tradition to Kabak's compelling and heartfelt body of work. It's such a pleasure to have Amanda here with us to speak more about the book. Please welcome Amanda Kabak and Tim Hillegonds. Hooray.
We're all clapping virtually.
That's right.
Well, thanks so much, Bonnie. Appreciate you getting us kicked off tonight, and thanks to Brookline Booksmith for hosting this event. You know, it's a big thing in a writer's life when a bookstore gets behind him and shows some support. And I know that this particular bookstore in Boston holds a special place in Amanda's heart. So it's very exciting to be able to talk about this book, to be able to talk about it virtually through this connection. One thing that I will mention, and Amanda, you can maybe add a little color to this, but for those of you who have read this book, the place where the office is of Joe and Mandolin is actually pretty much right across the street from where the bookstore exists in real life. Is that right?
It is right. Yeah, it's just across the street and down the block. So
So there's a little virtual and real life connection there, which I love. So we're here, we made it. And I'm happy that all of you are here as well. It's going to be a fun night, talk about this book, ask Amanda some questions, and just talk about writing and what it's like to put a book like this out into the world. As Bonnie said, my name is Timothy J. Hillegonds. I'm an essayist and memoirist who has the great honor and privilege of playing just a small role in helping Amanda bring this book into the world. But enough about me, because we're here to talk about you, Amanda. And I'm going to reintroduce you because I think you're worth a reintroduction. So Amanda Kabak is a writer who New York Times bestselling author Tayari Jones calls a writer to watch and an old-fashioned storyteller whose sharp eye is trained in a changing world. She's an award-winning fiction writer whose previous novel, The Mathematics of Change, is a masterclass on character development that breaks open and breaks down the equation of midlife. Amanda is a denizen of the in-between, a person and novelist and friend, I might add, who thrives in the uncategorized gray area between male and female, art and science, intellectual and physical. She designs and writes industrial software by day and stories and books by night. And we're here this night because she's written a smart, timely novel that I'm absolutely delighted to talk about, Upended. So welcome to all of you again. Welcome to you, Amanda. I want to tell just a quick short story about how Amanda and I met. This is sort of one of my favorite stories, but back, I don't know, over 10 years ago now, I think, I was in grad school at DePaul in Chicago here. And for those of you who know Amanda, she's lived in Boston, lived in Florida, and lived in Chicago for a time. And while I was in grad school, I would ride my bike up to this coffee shop on Wabash Avenue called Pete's. And almost every single time that I showed up at this coffee shop, I would walk in to get my coffee and work on a book that I was writing. And I would see a person sitting at a table writing longhand, I might add, on a pad of paper. So time and time again, this happens. And I see Amanda over and over again. And finally one day I just walk up to her and I'm like, hey, are you a writer? And she's like, I am. And thus began a friendship that I don't think either of us really thought was going to spawn from that. But, you know, here it is. And 2 books later for you, 1 for me, and a whole bunch of thrown out drafts between then and now. So let's jump into talking about the book. You know, why don't we obviously heard the description from Bonnie, but why don't you kind of talk about it in your own words and sort of orient everyone with what the book's about?
Sure. Well, before I start, I just really want to thank Brookline Booksmith again for having me here. It was my first love, my first bookstore love was Brookline Booksmith. I went to Boston University, which is just adjacent to Brookline where that is. So it's a real honor to be here. And thank you, Tim, for helping me with this. And you know, I would see Tim and I'm like, who's that joker? You know?
right, for sure.
And I am not the most approachable person, especially when I'm
Yes.
writing. So, you know,
Yeah.
good on Tim for coming over to me and chatting. But yeah, Upended. So the crux of the book is really the question in my mind of what happens when something happens. So there's an inciting event, and these happen in our lives all the time. And what happens because of it? You know, how do things that happen to us make us change or make us reevaluate? And then how do changes in us affect the people around us? It's a, you know, we're interconnected as people in our families and friends. And, you know, we don't experience things solo in this world. We experience things and other people experience us experiencing things, especially if they're something really large and traumatic.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I love the way you described that. You know, what sort of changes does trauma in our lives or events in our lives make or have happened in other people? In this book, there's sort of a cast of characters, right? And the book is told through the sort of perspectives of these characters. So why don't you just give us a quick little summary of some of the characters in the book?
Yeah. So Mandolin Sawyer is the you could call her the main character, although all four pretty much have top billing. But Mandolin Sawyer is the main protagonist who experiences the attack, and she's got her younger brother Ethan, who has moved to town a year ago, and he's a little aimless barista musician. She's got her business partner Joe, who they've been working side by side in a startup for the last 3 years. And if anyone besides me and Tim on this call have worked in a startup, that's a lot of together time.
Right, it is.
And then Zoe, who is a neighborhood acquaintance of Madeleine's. They frequented the same cafe, and she's kind of had this crush from afar. But this event ends up drawing them closer together. And so each of them has their own things that they're struggling with outside of Mandolin, and then having Mandolin kind of change in front of their eyes because of what happens to her makes them reevaluate everything.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great entree, I think, maybe into what I think you're going to read first. So why don't you go ahead and read this first passage for us?
Sure. So quick introduction. This is a few days after the attack. Mandolin is still in the hospital. Ethan disappeared from the hospital one night and then suddenly reappears in her hospital room. I think it's the next day or the day after. Ethan appeared in her doorway late in the morning, a sudden, hulking, mouth-breathing apparition that scared the living shit out of her. She couldn't empty her lungs until he moved into the room and became undeniably Ethan, tugging at his ratty-ass beard, his face pale and eyebrows pinched. His hand drifted down to his chest, resting momentarily on his heart. He squinted at her. "You look like crap." He dropped down on a chair next to the bed. "And that's surprising?" "No, it's..." She tried and failed to sit up. "Where the fuck have you been?" "Now, hey, listen, I know you, just because I..." He looked anywhere but at her, his leg jiggling. "I mean, seriously, Maddie." The longer he took to answer, the more a helpless anger overtook her receding fear. He squeezed his lips shut and made a production of breathing loudly through flared nostrils. "I was scared out of my wits, okay?" Inside her ire was an immense weariness, but inside that was a comfort so old and dear it was worn threadbare. There it was, a quietness that existed nowhere else in nature except when she was here and he was there, and the full weight of their wordless history rested between them. "I brought you something." He leaned forward to dig around in a backpack at his feet and handed her a crinkled brown bag with a grease stain at a bottom corner. "Grilled cheese from the diner. Hopefully it's still at least a little warm." She opened the bag's folded over top and took a deep huff of savory cheesiness, ignoring the stab of pain it caused. "Now I'm really mad you didn't come by yesterday." She unwrapped the sandwich and bit off a corner. It was barely over room temperature, and her molars ached when chewing the toasted crust, but she didn't care. The combination of Ethan and cheese sated something in her deep lizard brain, and for a few miracle minutes, she could just breathe and chew and occasionally blink and leave it at that. He said, "I don't know how many of these you made for me growing up." "One every school day for, what, 3 years? American cheese slices and butternut white bread. And not that whole grain white bread nonsense." She was still a few bites shy of finishing, her fingers bright with butter, when Ethan asked, "How you feeling anyway? Do they still have you on the good stuff?" "I'm surviving, but it's much worse than last time," she said without thinking. "What last time?" "They took me off the hard drugs yesterday." "What do you mean last time?" His leg started jiggling again, the denim of his jeans swishing against the chair. The remaining corner of the sandwich, with its crunchy crust and even a bit of charred cheese, was the perfect bite, but it was suddenly unappealing. She shoved it in the bag and crumpled the brown paper around it. Ethan said, "Hey, you're the one who brought it up." He was right. And if she still couldn't find it in herself to tell him everything about the attack, exposing this other long ago event was at least something, however poor a substitute. My senior year in high school, the girls in my class gave me some spring fever hazing in the parking lot behind the locker room. Kicked me mostly. I'm pretty sure they cracked a rib. It hurt to breathe for a while. There he went with that beard again, rubbing and pulling at it as if it were a genie-filled lamp. I can't believe I don't remember that. I didn't broadcast my condition. What'd you tell Mom and Dad? Nothing. They never asked. His leg went still, and he planted his hands on the faded denim of his thighs. Even his breathing went low, inaudible. You mean nothing happened to those bitches? She should have kept this to herself. It was a long time ago. There's no statute of limitations on what the fucks. His voice rose in both pitch and volume. Let's drop it. You brought it up. She turned to him, her whole upper body wincing at the movement. Drop it. He screwed up his face like the 7-year-old he used to be, the one who ate those grilled cheese sandwiches and kept her perfect company during interminable high school afternoons. The way he'd eased the pain of being a social pariah made her soften to him now, at least a little. She said, I didn't mean that, or at least the tone. I'm not mad at you, but I've got enough on my mind without that memory. As if she hadn't been thinking about it for days. He sat forward in the chair, but before he could say anything, she added, even though I brought it up. But Ethan wasn't having any of it. It's not right, Maddie. A lot of things aren't right. She'd had every intention of telling him about what her attacker had said, a secret that ate away at her, but also felt too privately horrible to share. But after this reaction, she buried it back down. She didn't want to talk about it, and he had enough to handle already. He slammed himself back in his seat, sending it squealing a couple inches across the linoleum. His sigh was rough, theatrical, and he forced a hand through his already disheveled hair. Where's your boyfriend anyway? I expected him to be attached to your hip. Madeline rolled her eyes, a move that flirted with the boundary of her pain. I don't know what your beef is with Joe, but knock it off. He's like you, but without the good parts. A little insipid, offensively well-meaning. At the hospital on Saturday, he told me he loved you. Well, I love him too. I think he meant, love. You're on crack. We're business partners. He's the most professional person I know. And I'm gay. And I'm not even his type. He played it off well, but he was googly-eyed over Jane. Ethan laughed. Who wasn't? She glared at him. His eyebrows went up and his eyes got all innocent wide. I'm just saying, you're the one who wanted the subject changed. Not to one guaranteed to piss me off. It's better than the alternative. And what's that? I don't know. Talking about what really happened? Or about your complete disregard for the truth when it might actually matter? Though she'd been yearning for the comfortable appeasement she'd always gotten from Ethan, this needling animation and the antagonistic feeling it stirred in her wasn't entirely unpleasant. Even so, she dodged the sliver of truth in his words. Ethan, there's a bigger picture here. Is there? Is there really? Because you're withholding valuable information from the police is a pretty damn big picture to me. You think you know something, but you don't. Have you thought about trying to explain instead of writing me off as a total idiot? There's nothing to explain. She wrapped an arm around her chest to contain the pain her outburst caused and continued in a hoarse whisper. When the police were questioning me, they kept pushing, like they were looking to trip me up or something, like there were right and wrong things to say. And there were, clearly, but I'd just been attacked. They were like that about my saying the wrong thing because I was flustered. How do you think they'd take what I had to say once they knew how much I'd had to drink that night, huh? You don't know, Ethan. You just don't. live in this fantasy world where cops actually do something about attacks like this, where they find the guy. But I could lay the God's honest truth at their feet and nothing would be any different.
Thank you. I mean, I love that you chose to read that scene. It's such a complicated scene. There's so many layers of complexity to it. And I think we can talk about this more later, but I think you have such a gift for dialogue between, especially in this scenario, between a sister and a brother with heightened emotions, all of this sort of background information that we get about, who they were when they were growing up, and now the sort of complicated turn that it's taken. So this essentially, to me, at least when I read this, kind of revolves around Mandolin not wanting to withhold or not wanting to divulge critical information in two scenarios that we get in this particular section. So the first, and sort of like the big one, is that her attacker had called her a dyke during the attack, and she chose to withhold that critical piece of information from the police when they were interviewing her. So why do you think that Mandolin did that?
I don't think she initially meant to. And then I think, and she wrestles with this too, because I don't think she really knows in the beginning. And she goes through several different explanations in her own head about it throughout the book. But, if you think back to what happened to her in high school, and there are other scenes where she talks about she came out at a very young age in a conservative place, and the way she handled it was being very honest about everything, saying, this is who I am. I'm going to kind of live my truth. And of course, she's punished for it, and she's punished for it in various different ways, but she still kind of clings to this idea of truth is going to win over all, that honesty is not only the best policy, but, it's the only way for her to be known. And she desperately craves to be known. And she came out when she was 14. Everyone goes through this, either intense desire to hide or be known, or both at once, right? When they're young, figuring out who they are. So, she's got this thing with the truth, and she's been punished for it. And now it's kind of happened again.
Yeah. I mean, she's not shy, right? Like, she works in the startup world, which is, a world where she has to speak her mind. They have this management consultancy where they're constantly, sort of like helping fix businesses. So it's not about her not being able to assert herself or to be able to say the hard thing. It seems to me like she's coming to this point where she's reckoning with this way that she's lived her life. This idea that the truth matters. And I've heard you say truth is vulnerability. And it seems to me that she feels this vulnerability in the moment. I mean, would you say that that's true?
I think so. But I mean, the interesting thing to me about truth is, there's who we think we are, who we actually are, who other people see us as, and who we think other people see us as. And what's the truth, right? And so, Mandolin's aim is to try to reconcile all of that, which is pretty much impossible. But, that's how she feels. Okay, well, the world will be okay if I am totally consistent. And almost in the attempt to be totally consistent, she's wildly inconsistent and can't even recognize it. Yeah.
Well, it's so hard to see, right, from our own perspectives. So switching gears to Ethan a little bit then. So, he's obviously incensed by her decision not to give the police the information that they want. Maybe he feels, love for his sister and wants to protect her and feels like that's the right way to go about it. But I couldn't help when I was reading it, was just thinking about the differences between men and women when it comes to victimization and who's believed and who's not. And then also the ways in which queerness is weaponized by people in power and what the police could ultimately do with this information. So let's talk about that for a minute and how that kind of manifests.
Yeah. I mean, even though, Ethan has known Mandolin his whole life, and he's kind of seen some of what she's gone through for being who she is, he doesn't understand, and he can't. You know, I mean, he's got a very privileged position despite what he's been exposed to. He hasn't experienced what she has firsthand, and
Mhm.
he didn't even know, right, about the time in high school when she was hazed. So you know, he comes into this with this idea of we can make this right. You know, we can find the guy, we can put him away. The police are going to help. You know, everything's going to be okay. And she's coming from the world where she had, you know, probably friends harassed in college or assaulted in college for being gay or for being women, and no one believed them or no one took them seriously, or even if they did take them seriously, no one was ever caught, or they were caught and never punished. And so, you know, she
Right.
comes with this lifetime of distrust for the system that nothing's really going to help. So I might as well do some self-preservation, not tell them I was out at a club getting drunk, you know, and not put myself in this position of being judged by them and still having nothing happen. And he can't really understand that.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I mean, I struggled with it, and I'm like, we had some conversations after I finished the book about Ethan, and he's the one character in the book that drove me absolutely nuts. And I'm in recovery, and we've got a saying in recovery that's called "You spot it, you got it." And so I'm sitting there going, like, all right, well, if Ethan is driving me crazy, it's probably because there's something about Ethan that reminds me of myself that I don't like. And I do wonder if it's that sort of like male attempt to fix everything, right? That sort of one-dimensional masculinity that says, like, especially for me, right? Like, I'm a straight cisgender white guy that has occupied positions of power just based on those categorizations, and don't have the sort of lived experience in the same way that Ethan doesn't have the lived experience, and thinks that sometimes it is as simple as like, no, just do the one thing and then we'll be able to fix the situation. And I think that, one of the things that the book does, or one of the things that the book did for me, is just continue to sort of cement that into me, that I have to be aware that my perspective isn't the only perspective. And at the end of the day, it's far more important for me to listen and understand in certain situations than it is to try to, prescribe some sort of thing.
Right.
So,
I think especially when something seems inexplicable to you, you're like, this makes no sense. I've been thinking about it and it still makes no sense. And
right.
that's the key to say, well, it probably doesn't make sense because you're coming from things from such opposite experiences.
Right. Yeah. And Madeleine's, her sort of response to this generally is, it's so all over the place, right? I mean, she can't really figure out how she thinks or how she feels about it, right? Like,
Yeah.
she's angry, she's scared, she's mad, she's frustrated, she's confused. And that comes out in a lot of different ways, which feels very real to how complicated situations unfold.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about lying then. So it seems to me, as I was reading through this, that in one way or another, every character in this book is lying about something. So tell me about that a little bit.
Well, it's what we do, right? I mean, we lie to ourselves about things that we don't want to acknowledge, either things we've been through that we don't want to reckon with, or characteristic traits that we don't want to deal with, or um, you know, reactions that we imagine people are going to have if they find out about X, Y, and Z. We tie ourselves up in knots of lies to ourselves, and then all of that is, you know, now then projects outward because we're trying to manage what other people think about us, and we want to present this idea of who we want to be seen as to everyone else, and that's this calculated facade that probably actually reveals more about us than we would hope that it does.
Yeah.
It probably does the exact opposite of what we're trying to do, and it makes us completely obvious to everyone else. So lying it's part of society. It's part of living with other people. And there are movements about total honesty, and it's just everything is colored by perception, everything is colored by experience, everything has to be put into words that are then kind of reabsorbed and translated by other people who have lay their own experiences on it. And if you think about it too much, it'll drive you nuts because you're like, no one's ever going to understand me, probably not even myself. So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, it's such a good point. And I think like one of the triumphs of the book is that while Madeline is the sort of main protagonist, and we get a lot about who she is and the ways in which she moves through the world through her perspective. But as we get deeper into the narrative, we start to learn more about Madeline based on the things that she's hiding from the various characters, and especially through the ways that she responds to the inquiries of the various characters.
Right.
So it's a fun sort of circular ride, I think, that we're going on.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, I think that's a pretty good spot to maybe get to the second reading. I know you've got some other pages prepared, so why don't we jump into that?
Okay. So this is a few weeks later. Mandolin's been home from the hospital, has ejected herself from Joe's apartment, is hiding out in her apartment. She's still got some physical issues from the attack. I'm going to read a little section at the beginning of the day from Madeleine's perspective, and then we'll switch over to Zoe, who she sees later that evening. Mandolin woke from a snippet of nightmare and couldn't fall back to sleep. The room breathed with gray light. The street lamps glow, patterning the wall opposite her with stripes from her blinds. It was too bright to be dark and too dark to read, and this good-for-nothing atmosphere echoed the impossibility of comfort. She shifted her unwieldy body around, trying to find a position that would allow her to relax her back and hips and shoulders, but her back and hips and shoulders weren't the real problem. She felt insane, certifiable. Her mind was an unruly alien force, resistant to reason or soothing. It whispered nonsense about the malevolent motives of those closest to her, which made her question her own murky, suspect decisions. How much of this internal misery was created by her own hand? How much worse had she managed to make the damage her attacker had already done? She was hiding out, but there was no escaping herself. She'd never been able to do that, had only succeeded in burying what she didn't want to face under an avalanche of outside stimulation. But now here she was, rejecting the world, more specifically anyone who cared about her, because they might have something to say about the attack or her current behavior, or even worse, who she had been or who they thought she'd been before. Then later that day, she goes and sees Zoe at her office. Zoe, who has just had a hard conversation with her roommate and kind of rent a date to family functions, Troy. Zoe couldn't marry Troy. Not only was it a ludicrous idea that wouldn't even solve this problem, but these days she feels swollen with unspecific, undirected desires. She craved a weighty satisfaction, the kind of thing that accompanied love or accomplishment, or even the irredeemable failure of a large painting. She wanted to try hard at something dauntingly difficult. From one of the gray, bean-shaped couches in the reception area, Zoe watched Mandolin back her way through the glass door of the suite and thought, something difficult indeed. The knobs of Mandolin's knees were shadowed behind sagging holes in her jeans, the left one obscured by the black straps of the brace. Her hair drifted to her shoulders in soft curls. She had dark circles under her eyes, and the sleeves of her t-shirt were pushed to her elbows, bunching over her biceps like they were caught by the pads of her crutches. Zoe scrambled to her feet, vexed at being so affected by the sight of Mandolin that she had failed at the most basic courtesy of holding the door open for her. So they kind of navigate their way to a conference room for the work that they're supposed to do together. Delving into work was initially a relief, but over the next hour, Zoe couldn't tame her own distraction. She kept stealing long glances at Mandolin while she was otherwise occupied. Zoe's varied memories of her layering on top of each other like oil paint on a reused canvas. With her makeup and hair done, she looked remarkably like the Rosemary's Kitchen regular Zoe had admired across the vast acquaintance divide. But the stretched out neck of her t-shirt kept evoking that night in Madeleine's apartment, the night of the grand dismissal, and Zoe wondered yet again what had happened to her. Not an accident, she'd been clear, but what was the absence of accident if not intent, as one of her mentors had taught her? Intent meant nothing remotely good in this case. Zoe felt a surge of the same feverish confidence she'd experienced that night at Madeleine's and said, I shouldn't have left you like that. Mandolin closed her laptop and sat with her hands gripping its sides. I don't recall giving you much choice. You said it wasn't an accident. She scrunched up her face and her knuckles whitened. Let's just leave the whole thing and my not being my best self that night. I hate that phrase. Are we supposed to walk around being our best selves day in and day out? What's best about that? This came out way more forcefully than Zoe had intended, her insistence leaving her leaning over the table. Fine. I was well below average. Still am, if you want to know the truth. It's been a long day, and I left my medication at home. Not that I want to go back. Hey, are you hungry? I'm hungry. She checked her watch, which was loose and so far up her wrist that it crowded her hand. How about Rosemary's, you and me? The hell was that? An hour of business-only freeze-out, then a dinner invitation? She wanted to be offended, but she was tempted to surrender. Forget Troy waiting at home and go have dinner. With Mandolin, not just next to her. Instead, she asked, will you tell me what happened to you? Forget what I said that night. I can't. You were scared. You needed someone there with you, and I shouldn't have left, no matter what you said. It was a fantasy that she could have resisted being railroaded out the door, but that was beside the point. Mandolin relinquished her laptop and rubbed the tip of a forefinger over the ragged nail of her thumb before meeting Zoe's gaze. Her eyes were glassy, but underneath that sheen, her gingerbread irises were soft and inviting. And Zoe, who had always made a point of not looking too directly at Mandolin, didn't want to turn away. She wanted to have known Mandolin in high school, befriended her when no one else would, kissed her behind the bleachers years and years before their moment at Club True. Mandolin tugged at the collar of her shirt. It's been a really long day. Zoe nodded, but didn't budge. She didn't know where this wave of ballsiness came from, but she was going to ride it as long as it lasted. Eventually, Mandolin started to talk, but instead of a coherent story with a defined beginning, she came out with a number of seemingly disjointed comments about her ex and her office and, finally, her brother. Ethan's right. I don't like being alone. And I've been alone a long time, even though I'm always with clients or Joe. So I went to the club as an escape, and I danced with you as an escape, and you kissed me. I really had had too much to drink. I wasn't lying. I didn't lie before, not intentionally at least. And I took the T home, even though it was late, and I shouldn't have. But a car would have gotten me there too quickly. Then a block from the train. She was looking right through Zoe, unblinking, her eyes wide. Zoe could see her pulse working in her neck and watch the top of her chest rise and fall with her breath. She thought Mandolin was going to stop there and leave her hanging again. But after a long moment, Mandolin went on, her voice low and husky, telling Zoe the horrible truth. He dragged me into an alley, called me. She cut herself off and held her breath for a moment before going on. He was going to rape me, but he couldn't, do it. And he freaked out about it. He was furious, totally lost it, and beat me instead, tried to kill me. She took a breath, held it, then said in a low voice, he called me a dyke. Again and again, blamed me for. She shuddered and winced, pressing the back of a closed fist against her mouth. Her eyes slowly focused on Zoe, and they sat in a quiet made thicker when the office ventilation system shut down. Zoe felt unequal to what had just gone down, but at the same time, she was saturated, vibrating, and she let this fullness guide her hand across the blonde wood table between them until it settled on top of one of Madeleine's. She said, "I'm really sorry." Madeline's shoulders jerked back, and she slipped her hand out from under Zoe's palm. "What am I doing?" The words were a thick, angry mumble. She pushed her laptop into her bag and got up with a hop, keys jangling in her pocket. "Madeline." "No." She slung her bag across her body, ducking under its strap, wincing when she pulled her arm through. "I can't believe I just did that. This is not your problem. I'm not your problem. My choices are my fucking choices." She touched her nose and her eyebrows, "Letting you up that night." She dropped her hands to her sides. "It was a mistake. I was stupid and desperate." Zoe stood to bring herself to Madeline's level and maybe keep her from running or crutching away like she seemed about to. "Hey, I'm trying to help here. You're acting like there's no such thing as friendship." Madeline's eyes were squeezed into a devastating squint. "Of course there's friendship and family and love, and it's all conditional and transient." She settled her crutches under her arms. "And we're not friends." Then she was gone. Well, that wasn't exactly true. Without the white noise of the HVAC, Zoe heard her crutch down the short hall, turn the corner to reception, cross the room, and pause to open the door. Then she was gone. Part of Zoe wanted to leave it at exactly that. They weren't friends. They would never be friends, and she would be smart to forget everything about the last 20 minutes. But at the same time, she felt an undeniable connection with Madeline, and having heard the sadness, maybe even regret, in her last knife-twisting statement, Zoe wanted to shoulder some of her pain, help shave off the edges of her clearly immense loneliness. She believed she could do it, given how well she understood the self-doubt behind Madeline's abrupt hardness. Discarded dreams, indeed, and complacency. Zoe had gone to art school and dumped her handsome, well-heeled fiancé, but she was wrong if she thought that was the end of it. That wasn't the end. It was, she realized now, just the beginning.
Thank you for reading that. It's such a powerful section, and the note that it ends on seems so prophetic for so many things, right? It was, she realized now just the beginning, wasn't the end, which feels very indicative of kind of what it's like to go through trauma. So I know there's a bunch of questions coming in, so I want to get to those in a second, but I do want to leave before we stop here, I do want to ask you the big burning question I have, which is, why you're choosing to deal with such big, sort of important topics like assault and identity and, capital T truth, not easy things to write about and reckon with. So what pulls you to that type of material?
It's a funny question because I always wanted to be considered a writer who tackled, big issues. And I never felt that I was, and at the Kentucky Women's Writers Conference, I was at I had a little exercise where one of the writers there had us go through, she asked us 5 questions and seemingly unrelated questions, right? And we wrote down our answers. And then at the end, she's like, okay, well, the first question was like, what's one of your first memories? And for me, it was eating toasted cheese sandwiches or grilled cheese sandwiches after kindergarten. And, we just had a specific way, Mom had a specific way that she made them. Hi, Mom, she's on the call. And they were just like so buttery and good and cheesy. So that was one of my first memories. And then the last question was, basically, what do you want out of your writing? And it was to like tackle these big issues. And so she asked us all to like, well, how are your first and last answers related? And I was working on this book at the time, and there's grilled cheeses all over the place, right? I mean, cheese is like this constant theme in the book,
right,
probably
right.
because I can't really eat it anymore, and I love it so much. But and I I came out of that, and I was like, I just need to write the grilled cheese sandwiches. That's where I live. I live in the grilled cheese sandwiches. I live in these really close relationships and friendships and in family. but all of the things that happen in close relationships are microcosms of the big things that are happening to us. We deal with the big things that are happening to us through our closest relationships. We don't deal with them alone. So I manifest, I really go kind of micro, and then you realize that it's all fractal, right? I mean, everything happens at every level, and I just kind of look at it in this really close friendship and family aspect. But it's still everything that's going on in the world and in your life. I mean, think about the conversations you have with your partner on the couch at night. After watching the news or something, it all distills down to your closest relationships. And so that's just how I kind of view from the little tiny, microscopic things up through the different layers to the big stuff that's happening. So the big stuff just happens, but that's not what I write about. I write the grilled cheese sandwiches.
Yeah, exactly. The lived experience in the small moments.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. Well done. And that comes through in the book. And I've been craving grilled cheese sandwiches for a month now, and I'm blaming you. So we got a few questions here, and I know we've got about 13 minutes left. So I'm just going to kind of roll through some of these. So this first question says, how did the themes of this book come to you? Did you set out to write about how events that change a person have an impact on others in their life? Or did you start writing these characters and the story simply evolved from the characters?
Well, it's a little of both, but definitely I had an idea for a novel like this for years and years and years before I wrote the first version of this, which if you've read my newsletter, is nothing like the version that is now in print. But the whole idea of it was something happens to someone and everyone else is affected by it. And I had no idea who it was that something happened to, what it was that happened to them. I had a feeling there was a brother,
Yeah.
and that was it. Like, that's all. I'm like, it was this very nascent idea, but I was just fascinated by this idea of a domino effect, of everyone reacting to someone's reaction to their own trauma.
Okay, and the next question here then is, what was one of the is there an easy part of writing a book? But what was one of the easy parts of writing this book, and what was one of the most challenging?
There was nothing easy about this book. I think the
Right.
easiest part was I was running along Lake Michigan on the little kind of dirt side path to the asphalt bike path. And I was like, oh, okay, wait, I think I know how this book starts. She's trail running. She's trail running the Sheepfold north of Boston. And she's trail running.
Right.
But I felt brilliant. I was like, yes, okay, I can
Yeah.
start this book. And then it all went downhill from there. So everything was difficult with this book. It took 5 years. It took 2 completely wildly different drafts. In the first draft, Mandolin actually never has a point of view in the book. It's all about everyone else and not her. And then even when I had switched the structure, it took another 3 drafts, and I realized, I almost cried at that coffee shop when I realized I still don't know who Mandolin is.
Yeah.
And I had been working on the book 3 years by then, and it was so demoralizing, especially as I'm kind of known for character-driven fiction, and I had no idea who my main character was, and so
like,
everything about it was hard. Yes, it was, but I learned an enormous amount. But yeah, it was a struggle to get this one written.
Yeah. But, you were known as the machine in grad school, right? And the machine gets it done. So you
gets it done.
You were at that coffee shop and figured it out. And
Yeah.
now we have this book.
That's right.
So this next question says, in your first book, the 2 female leads have a sort of metamorphosis, or they choose a significant change in their lives. Can you speak about if you think lying was predominant in that story, similar to how it is in Upended?
I think that one was a little different. I think, what happened in that story is, they had each made choices early in their life that they had kind of solidified them on certain paths. And they kind of had to make the choice of, do I remain faithful to these really formative decisions that I made and that I've grown really comfortable with, but are limiting my experience in life? Or do I do the really hard work of making a change and going in a different direction? And so I think there it was less about lying than really reckoning with who they had made themselves to be.
Hmm. Yeah. So is Cheryl, who's Cheryl?
That's my mom.
Cheryl's your mom, right? So we got to get mom's question in here then. Is there anything of your character that's shared in Mandolin?
Well, I mean, Mandolin doesn't exist outside my head, so she's all me in some ways.
Right.
That's a really good question. I mean, she's a voracious reader. She is, there's things about her I aspire to be. She's really incredibly empathetic. She gives everyone the benefit of the doubt. She always looks, or at least before this happened, always looked for the best in people, which I think is such an admirable quality, and I fall short of, despite my attempts at that. But she does a lot of hiding from herself and hiding from the choices that she's made, which I've tried very hard not to do. But I think we all do it to an extent, and you're always, you're always looking at, well, where did I come from and where am I going? And how do I choose? Mandolin chose or tried to choose really specific direction for her life. And she made those choices for various reasons, but she kind of made choices and then followed those choices. And that's definitely something that I try to do in my life as well.
I like that. And it kind of goes hand in hand with this next question here that says, what did you learn from writing this book, spending time with these characters, and did it influence or change any of your views about the world? And so that's a great question.
Yeah, I mean, I should have learned to stop writing because
right.
it was so painful.
Yeah.
But I think it's, I mean, honesty is important, and especially with yourself, and letting go of trying to live up to what you think people's ideas of you are. Because what you find out in this book is that lots of times the idea you think people have of you is not at all the idea they have of you. And that's something that's happened in my life. Like I had these certain thoughts about myself as, oh, I'm kind of a hard ass, I'm not very approachable. I'm not actually very nice. And then I have people tell me, oh, you were so nice to me at this time, or what you said really affected me. And I was like, oh, okay. So maybe I am, my idea of myself is not how other people see me. And, it's important to kind of almost like do product testing, right?
Yeah.
From a business perspective is how do people really see me? Do I have a warped idea of myself? And it's checking in on that, I think, is important for all of us to do, because we walk around with a lot of imagined expectations, I think.
Yeah, the story we tell ourselves about who we are, right? And I think like the thing we forget to do sometimes is realize we can revise that, right?
Yes.
At any time.
Yes.
And as writers, we should know this, but of course, it's much harder to do.
It's really hard because part of revising is, whether it's true or not, I feel it as an admission that I was wrong. And it's really hard to admit that, we were wrong about something, especially if it were something really fundamental.
Yeah. Interesting. I'm sure you've heard this before, but I heard someone talk about revision one time as revisioning, right? Like you come at it with a new vision of what you want it to be. And in that sense, it's not about being wrong. It's just about how can this be better or different with this new vision that I have for it.
Right.
It sounds like there was a big revisioning that happened, about halfway through this thing.
Yeah.
So we got a couple more here. One is about this idea of self-worth and recognizing some themes of self-worth and having some hard times figuring out someone's self-worth. Nettie, Mandolin, Ethan, Zoe. So would you agree?
Yeah, I think so. And that was actually the hardest thing for me to get to in this book is Madeleine's internalized shame about being gay, because I don't feel that at all. And so it
Mhm.
was an entirely foreign idea to me that she could kind of embrace it in some ways and feel horrible about it in other ways, mostly because of how her father had reacted to it. And so, it's something that I'm really careful about in my life, but it's so endemic, especially if you're something that isn't mainstream or kind of universally valued, right? If you don't fit into this mold where you're going to be accepted and you're going to be liked just because of either the package that you're in or the career that you're pursuing, to not let the idea of being devalued by society make you feel that you don't have value.
Yeah. So I know everyone out there is wondering, and this is the question I think every writer hates to get, but what's next?
I have another book written that I am trying to sell.
Of course, the machine has a book
The
written.
machine has another book, which is actually a comedy. Because after this one, I was like, I can't write about anything serious anymore. And of course, it's about serious stuff, but it's wrapped in a comedy.
Yes.
So that's happening. And then, and speaking of totally non-serious as well, I have a romance coming up. So just kind of on a lark, to take a break from all the serious stuff I write. Over one holiday break in about 6 weeks, I wrote a romance. So I sold that in the spring, and that'll probably be out next year, early next year. So that'll come out. It's I think it's an interesting read. But definitely, if people ask what parts of you are in these characters, there are definitely parts of me in those characters.
Yeah.
And I'm working on another new book, so lots going on.
Lots going on. Well, look, I'm a huge fan of rom-coms, so I can't wait for the romance to come out. I'm definitely going to read that one, and certainly excited to see whatever it is that you do next. I'm feeling right now in this moment lazy because I don't have 3 books in the hopper.
But you have one great book, which is literally right behind me. So Tim's got a book out. Please take a look at it. It's great. He's a wonderful writer, very insightful dude, and also has been through a lot, and has done a lot of self-reflection. So make sure The Distance Between by Tim. Check it out and buy a copy.
Well, thank you, and you're too kind for doing that. I do appreciate it, though. Well, I guess the last question, maybe that'll take us out. Did you have a favorite character in the book?
I actually love Zoe.
Yeah, I like
Yeah,
Zoe
I
too.
love
Yeah,
Zoe. Yeah.
good deal. Well, thank you so much for doing this, Amanda. Thank you for the book. Thank you, Bonnie, for kicking us off, and thanks to Brookline, and to all of you for coming and being a part of this really special occasion.
Yes, thank you both, Tim and Amanda, so much for such a lovely event. Amazing, insightful questions from both Tim and our attendees. Thank you to our attendees for joining us, and for just a wonderful reading and a wonderful evening. It was lovely to have you both here, and thank you so, so much. My last housekeeping item, if you would like to purchase Upended, the link is in the chat. If you purchase it from our Eventbrite page, you can, by 9 a.m. tomorrow, you can receive a signed and personalized book plate from Amanda, which is amazing. Again, thank you both so much for coming, and it was so lovely to have you, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks so much, Bonnie, Brookline Booksmith, and Tim. And thanks everyone for joining. It was great to see your names.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Good night.